The crate was not supposed to make noise. Darren Olt had been checking cargo manifests for 6 years on docking ring 9, and he had learned to trust silence. Silence meant nothing was wrong. Silence meant he could finish his shift, go back to his bunk, eat something cold, and sleep without thinking about the Vyeth campaign. Silence was the only good thing left in his life. The crate was not silent. It was a low sound, not mechanical, not a pressure leak or a cooling unit. It was wet and broken and small, and it came from inside a sealed container marked Industrial Coolant, Tier 3 Hazardous. Darren stood in front of it for a full minute. He told himself it was a faulty sensor. He told himself it was none of his business. He told himself that opening a Tier 3 hazardous container without clearance was a dock violation that would cost him the last job he could get in this sector. He opened it anyway. The smell hit him first. Chemicals and blood and something older, something that reminded him of the jungle planets he had served on wet stone and smoke and deep earth. Inside the crate were 7 eggs. 6 of them were shattered, the shells dissolving in a puddle of pink fluid. The 7th was cracked but whole, and from the crack came the sound. That small, broken, wet sound. Darren reached in. The hatchling that fell into his hands was no bigger than a cat. Its scales were the color of old bronze, and half of them were burned away from chemical exposure. Its wings were folded wrong. Its eyes were sealed shut. It was shaking so hard he could feel it through his palms, and it was crying, a sound that had no right to exist from something so small, a sound that went straight through his ribs and landed somewhere he had thought was empty. He stood there holding it. Behind him, Galvas crossed the deck. Galvas was Grethian, 4-armed, gray-skinned, about twice Darren's width, and he ran docking ring 9 with the specific contempt he reserved for unlicensed human inspectors. He stopped when he saw the open crate. He looked at Darren. He looked at the hatchling. "Close that container," Galvas said very quietly. "What species is this?" Darren asked. "Close the container and walk away." "What species?" Darren said again. Galvas looked at him for a long moment. The Grethian's 4 arms folded in a pattern that meant discomfort in their body language, or fear. Darren had never learned which. "It does not matter what species," Galvas said. "The manifest owner is a consortium freight partner. You do not touch consortium cargo. You do not ask about consortium cargo. You close the container and you walk." The hatchling made the sound again, that broken, wet sound. Darren put it inside his jacket. He did not run. Running attracted attention. He walked across the deck, past 2 dock workers who stared but said nothing, past the secondary inspection gate where the scanner chirped softly at the biological mass under his coat, and he tapped the manual override badge on his hip like he did it every day. He made it to his hauler bay. He sealed the door. He sat down on the floor of his ship with his back against the landing strut. The hatchling crawled out of his jacket on its own. It stood on his knee on legs that shook. Its eyes were still sealed. It turned its head in his direction. It put its face against his chest. It went quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then it started crying again. Darren heard boots on the dock outside. 2 sets moving fast. He heard Galvas's voice on the station comm, already reporting him. He looked down at the hatchling on his knee, burned, broken, the last living thing in a crate full of shattered eggs, and made a calculation that had nothing to do with logic. He started the engine. The hauler pulled off the dock without clearance. The station's automated system screamed at him through the comm. A security skiff launched from the far dock and came up fast on his left side, running lights blazing. Darren pushed the throttle forward. He was not a good pilot. He was a freight inspector, but the red line was old and ugly, and she had a jump core that still worked, and in 40 seconds he had distance, and in 90 seconds he had a jump window, and then the stars stretched and he was gone. Deep space, quiet, just the hum of the drive and the sound of the hatchling crying in his lap. An alien dockworker back on Ring 9, a Lesathi named Ven, small and pale, who had watched the whole thing from the upper gantry, turned to the worker beside her and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, "He took it, he just took it." The other worker, a Vrethian with 6 eyes, watched the empty dock space where the human's hauler had been. "They do that," it said. "Humans, they bond with anything." A pause. "Even things that are already dead." "It is not dead," Ven said. "No," the Vrethian agreed. "It is not." On the red line in the dark between stars, Darren held the hatchling in both hands and looked at it. It was still shaking. It was still crying. It was the ugliest, most damaged, most inconvenient thing he had ever seen. He held it closer. "All right," he said to no one, to the dark, to the small shaking thing in his hands. "All right." The hatchling did not stop crying, but it pressed its face harder against his palm. Outside, the stars were cold, and the consortium was already moving. Neither of those things had stopped anything yet. 3 days into deep space, Darren ran out of ideas. The hatchling had eaten his protein block, half a foil of dried grain, and something it found behind the engine panel that Darren chose not to identify. It had tried to eat the comm wire. It had knocked his water pouch off the console twice, then looked at him like he was responsible. At some point during the second night, it had climbed onto his chest while he slept and stayed there until morning, a warm, scale-covered weight breathing in short, fast pulses against his sternum. When he tried to move, it gripped his shirt with all 4 claws and made a sound like a very small, very angry rockslide. He stopped moving. This was the problem, not the consortium pursuit alert on the long-range scanner, not the expired dock permit. The problem was he did not know what this creature needed to survive, and it had decided he was the answer to that question, and it was wrong. He pointed the red line toward the hollow, a converted ore processing barge stationary in dead zone coordinates for 11 years, run by a Tessari medic named Niv Oreth who charged too much and asked no questions. Darren had been there twice. He had paid once. Niv remembered the other time. He docked without broadcasting his ID and carried the hatchling under his jacket through the airlock. Niv was in the back bay, a Tessari, slim and gray-green, moving with the stillness of a species that evolved on a world where motion attracted predators. She was cleaning a bone saw. She looked at Darren. She looked at the lump under his jacket. "No," she said. "I haven't asked anything yet. Whatever it is, no." He took the hatchling out. It blinked its gold eyes at Niv and made the sound, that low, broken, wet sound that it still made sometimes, when the dark was too quiet. Niv did not move for a long time. Then she set down the bone saw and came forward and took the hatchling from his hands with the careful precision of someone who had handled fragile things before. She carried it to the scanner table. She ran the probe slowly over its body. Her face did not change, but her tail, Tessari tails were not under full conscious control, curled inward against her leg. "Darren," she said. "What is it? Where did you get this?" He told her about the crate, the shattered eggs, the Ring 9 dock. She listened without interrupting, which was not like her. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment that felt too long. "This is a Sorathi," she said. He did not know the word. She could tell. 40 years ago, she said, the Galactic Consortium issued a terraforming license for a Class 4 habitable world in the Death Cluster. The application listed the world as uninhabited. The world was not uninhabited. The species that lived there was called the Sorathi. She paused. They were declared extinct 39 years ago. Consortium records list the cause as environmental collapse. Darren looked at the hatchling on the scanner table. It was trying to eat the probe cable. "But it wasn't," he said. "No, it was not." Niv took the probe cable away from the hatchling. It looked at her with deep offense. "This is the only one left, and the moment anyone in a consortium-aligned system identifies it, they will send people to destroy it. And you, because you have seen it." Selin, Niv's young assistant, standing in the doorway, made a sound and left quickly. Darren looked at Niv. "What does it need to survive?" She checked the scanner readout, protein, heat, and this. She turned the screen toward him. It showed two waveforms, a biological scan of the hatchling's neural output laid against a reading of the room. The hatchling's line spiked and settled and spiked again. The room reading was flat, but there was a third line on the scan, a soft, irregular pulse that overlapped almost perfectly with the hatchling's rhythm. Niv pointed to it. "That is you," she said. "What does that mean?" Sorathi hatchlings imprint on a nest guardian in the first hours after hatching. The guardian's neural-emotional output becomes their baseline signal, what their own nervous system synchronizes to. She looked at him. "It's synchronized to you. If it is separated from you for more than a few hours at this stage, its system loses the anchor. It will go into shock. It will die." Darren looked at the hatchling. The hatchling looked back at him. Then it climbed off the scanner table, crossed the distance between them, and pressed its forehead against the back of his hand. Niv watched this. "Humans emit a remarkably strong emotional signal," she said, and her voice had something in it he could not name. "The Sorathi imprint mechanism was designed for their own parent species, but whatever your kind broadcasts, apparently it was close enough." Darren crouched down. The hatchling was small and burnt, and looking at him like he was the only fixed point in a spinning world. He gave it the rest of the grain from his pocket. He looked up at Niv. "I'm calling it Reth," he said. Niv said nothing for a moment. "That is a word from the old Lahisi tongue," she said. "It means found." "I know," Darren said. Reth ate the grain. Then it exhaled a slow breath, warm, carrying the first thin curl of smoke either of them had seen from it. Niv studied the smoke trail as it rose toward the ceiling. "You should leave," she said. "Soon." Outside, beyond the hollow's hull, the dark was not empty. It was just waiting. 2 weeks after leaving the hollow, Reth learned to play cards. Not well. Her strategy was to watch Darren's face, decide what expression meant he had good cards, and then bite his wrist whenever he tried to bluff. It was not a legal game interpretation. It was, however, effective. Darren lost 11 straight rounds of solitaire because Reth kept stealing the cards she found visually interesting and sitting on them. She was now the size of a medium-sized dog. The burns on her scales had healed, leaving patches of darker bronze where the new growth came in thicker. Her wings still folded crooked on one side. Her eyes, when she was calm, were a deep amber. When she was not calm, they went gold, a bright, flat gold that made the red line's proximity sensors stutter, though Darren had not yet connected those two things. He was running refugee shipping corridors to avoid consortium patrol lanes. Slower routes, emptier ones, the kind of routes where other ships did not look too closely. That was how Preva Dunn found him. She came aboard at a dead relay station, third corridor, with a passenger manifest that listed her as a medical courier. She was human, mid-30s, short, with the specific careful stillness of someone who had learned to be invisible in rooms that were dangerous. She looked at Darren. She looked at Reth. Reth looked back at her with amber eyes and did not move. "I've been tracking the Ring 9 trafficking ring for 4 months, Preva said, without sitting down. "You accidentally destroyed half my evidence trail when you grabbed that crate and ran. I need to know what was in it." "1 dragon," Darren said. "The rest were dead." Preva looked at Reth again. She was quiet for a moment. Then she put her bag down, which meant she was staying, and she pulled out a ration pack, which meant she was hungry, and she tore it open. Reth's head turned to track the smell with total focus. "Don't," Darren said. Reth looked at him, then looked at Preva, then very slowly, with enormous dignity, moved across the deck and sat down directly in front of Preva and stared at the ration pack. Preva looked at Reth, looked at Darren, then gave Reth a piece. Reth accepted it, went back to her corner, and ate it with the expression of someone who had made a considered business decision. "She accepted food from me," Preva said. "She accepts food from anyone," Darren said. Niv Orath says Sorathi hatchlings only accept food from beings they judge as non-threatening. She's been scanning people. Preva glanced over. She scanned me and decided I was fine. Darren looked at Reth. Reth was ignoring him completely. He had the distinct feeling he had just been outmaneuvered by a creature that still slept on his chest every night. Preva worked for a network called The Undercurrent. She explained it with the flatness of someone who had given the speech before. A loose chain of operators, couriers, and informants spread across non-consortium space, mostly humans, some others, all sharing one interest: finding and exposing what the consortium buried. She had a file on the Ring 9 trafficking operation. She had 3 other files, cross-referenced, that all pointed back to a senior consortium administrator named Ethan. She did not have the one thing that would make the case unignorable. She did not have proof that the Sorathi were not extinct by accident. There are records, she said, but they're in a sealed archive on a consortium verification node. To unseal them, you need a biological identifier from a living Sorathi. She looked at Reth. The last living Sorathi. Darren said nothing. I'm not asking you to go anywhere dangerous, Preva said. You're asking me to take Reth somewhere and use her as a key. I'm asking you to let a scan of her biosignature be transmitted to a relay node. It takes 11 seconds. We do it remotely. She doesn't even have to know. Reth looked up from her corner. Her eyes had gone gold. The red line's proximity sensor made a soft, staticky sound. Darren reached over and tapped it. It settled. She knows, he said. Preva stared at Reth, then at the sensor, then back at Reth. Is she doing that? I don't know, Darren said, which was not entirely true. He had started to suspect, but suspicion was easier to carry than certainty. Far away, on a consortium command station that existed on no public registry, Consul Ethan received a flagged alert on his private terminal. A biological identifier had been pinged on a Sorathi hatchling in the outer corridor shipping lanes. Alive, bonded to a human, moving. Ethan read the report twice. He was very old, as Vyerth measured age, and he had made difficult decisions before. He had made the most difficult decision of his career 39 years ago, and it had required signing one document on one morning and then not thinking about it again. He called his retrieval commander and gave an order. Then he went back to his other work. There were always other things that needed doing. On the red line, Reth stopped looking gold. She padded across the deck, climbed onto the console, and pressed her side against Darren's arm. Her scales were warm. Her breathing was slow. She watched the stars move outside the forward glass like she was memorizing them. Preva watched the two of them and said nothing for a long time. Then she quietly picked up her comm and sent a single-word message to her contact in the Undercurrent network. The contact replied immediately, "What changed?" She looked at Reth pressed against Darren's arm, at the stars outside, at the empty corridors ahead. "I found the right human," she sent back. Outside the red line, the corridor was quiet, but it would not stay that way. The warship came out of faster-than-light travel directly ahead, and Darren had exactly 4 seconds to understand what was happening before it started shooting. It was a consortium pursuit vessel, long, dark, built for interception rather than battle, which meant it was faster than anything Darren had. The first shot clipped the red line's left stabilizer and spun the ship 40 degrees. The second hit the cargo hold. A wall panel in the main bay ruptured inward. Darren was thrown across the console and hit the deck hard, and then the emergency lights came on red, and then there was a sound he had never heard before. It started low. So low he felt it in his back teeth before he heard it with his ears. It built fast, past the range of hearing, into something that pressed against the inside of his skull, and then past that, into something he could not describe except to say that it felt like the air was tightening. Reth was standing in the middle of the deck, wings spread wrong, eyes flat gold, and she was screaming. It was not a sound that belonged to something her size. It did not belong to anything he had ever heard. It went through the hull of the Red Line and out into the vacuum, and vacuum does not carry sound, and it carried it anyway. On the consortium pursuit vessel, every targeting array went offline simultaneously. 3 interior bulkheads cracked along their seams. The navigation system reset. Every crew member, 41 of them, experienced a full-body paralysis lasting 38 seconds. They could breathe. They could not move. They felt something that none of their post-mission reports would ever describe accurately, because none of them had words for it in any language they spoke. The warship dropped out of attack formation. It drifted. On the Red Line, the sound stopped. Darren came back to himself face down on the deck. His ears were ringing. His nose was bleeding. He pushed himself up and looked around. Reth was standing on his chest. She was trembling the whole length of her from her jaw to the tip of her tail, and her eyes were coming back from gold, cycling through amber, settling. She made a sound he had not heard before, low, continuous, like grinding crystal. She put her forehead against his chin. He lay there, he let her. After a moment he said, "Good girl," which was a thing he had started saying without meaning to, sometime in the second week, and she had started responding to it without either of them deciding that would happen. Her trembling slowed. They limped to Brath's landing on a stabilizer and a half, with a cargo hold open to a sealed emergency bulkhead, and Preva sitting in the co-pilot seat sending distress codes to every non-consortium relay in range. Brath's landing was a human colony, 12,000 people on a gray-green world at the outer edge of settled space. It was not a rich world. It had a defensive grid built from parts of 3 other defensive grids and held together with wire and stubbornness. Governor Ida Sallow met them at the landing pad. She was compact, white-haired, with the expression of someone who had made hard calls so long they no longer surprised her. She looked at the Red Line's damage. She looked at Preva. She looked at Darren. She looked at Reth, who had climbed to the top of the ship's hull during landing and was sitting there watching the colony spread out below with the focused attention of someone taking inventory. "What is that?" Governor Sallow said. "The last one," Darren said. She looked at him, he looked back. There was a long pause. "Get her inside," Sallow said. The medical bay at Brath's landing was not large. Within an hour it was full not of staff but of children. They had come the way children do, quietly and in ones and twos, drawn by the news that something strange had landed. They stood in the doorway and then edged inside, and Reth watched them come with amber eyes and did not move away. One girl, 8 or 9, with a bandaged hand from some unrelated accident, sat down on the floor 3 feet from Reth and stared at her. Reth stared back. Then Reth moved forward slowly and pressed the side of her head against the girl's unbandaged hand. The girl did not pull back. She looked at Darren. "She likes me," the girl said. "Apparently," Darren said. The girl fell asleep against Reth's side an hour later. Reth went completely still, the way she only went still when she was being careful about something. She looked at Darren across the room with an expression he was starting to be able to read. It meant, "Do not move her." He did not move her. Governor Sallow pulled him outside the bay. The consortium had sent a pursuit signal. The warship's distress call had gone out before Reth's frequency hit it. There would be more ships coming. More than one this time. "I can request emergency compact shelter," Sallow said. "It'll be a bluff. We have no compact, but it'll buy time." Darren looked through the window at Reth, asleep with a child against her side and 12 more sitting quietly around her in the dark. "Do it," he said. Sallow nodded once. She did not ask him if he was sure. She had already decided. He could tell. "They always do this," one of her deputies said from behind her, watching Darren watching the dragon. "Do what?" the governor asked. "Humans," the deputy said. "They find something, and then it's theirs, and then everything else just has to deal with that." Sallow went to make her call. Above Brath's landing the stars were quiet. They would not stay that way. Crying baby dragon refused to leave him and changed the fate of nations. 7 consortium vessels arrived in orbit above Brath's landing on the 4th day, and they announced themselves by going silent, no communication, no warning signal, no demand. Just 7 ships in a blocking formation, making the shape of a door that would not open. Darren watched them on the colony's long-range display. Reth watched them too, standing beside him on the observation platform, her shoulder at his hip now. She had grown again. Her scales had filled in fully deep bronze with a gold trace along each spine that only showed when the light hit at the right angle. She was not trembling this time. She was very still. Governor Sallow had made her bluff. The consortium had called it. The compact she named did not exist, and the consortium knew it. What the consortium had not expected was that the Undercurrent Network had spent those 4 days doing something else entirely. Preva had released everything. Not just the record of Reth's existence. The full file, Ethon's terraforming license, internal survey reports showing the Sorathi homeworld was inhabited, communications between consortium administrators deciding the word uninhabited was more convenient than occupied. 40 years of buried documents, moving through every non-consortium relay network in the outer systems faster than the consortium's legal teams could file suppression orders. The response was not what anyone predicted. 3 non-human species had Tessari diplomatic contacts in the outer systems. 2 of those contacts sent private messages to their governments before the consortium could reach them. By the 6th day, a Tessari elder diplomat named Lethon had arrived at Brath's landing on his own ship, without authorization from anyone, and walked through the colony gate alone. He was very old, even for Tessari. He moved slowly and looked at everything carefully, the way someone does when they know they are running out of time. He found Darren in the medical bay, sitting on a crate, eating. Reth was beside him, also eating. Lethon looked at Reth for a long time. Then he sat down across from them, and he told Darren what the Sorathi were. Not what the consortium records said, what they actually were. Lethon had spent 30 years studying the Sorathi in secret, their history, their biology, the accounts of other species who had known them before the homeworld was destroyed. He had been waiting for this moment without expecting it to come. Reth, he said, was approaching a stage called resonance maturity. Every Sorathi reached it if they lived long enough, if they bonded deeply enough. It was not a weapon. It was not an ability. It was closer to a broadcast, a full expression of the Sorathi's synchronized neural state that carried outward at a frequency every living species with a nervous system could receive. Not as sound, not as language, as feeling, pure and unfiltered and true. The consortium had exterminated the Sorathi because a species that could make every other species feel the emotional truth of an event, without politics, without spin, without the option to look away, was too dangerous to allow near a galactic governing body. "What does she broadcast?" Darren asked. Lethon looked at Reth. Reth looked back at him with amber eyes. "Whatever she has synchronized to," Lethon said. "Her bond state, her anchor." He looked at Darren. "You." Darren said nothing. "When she broadcasts," Lethon said, "every species in receiver range will feel what she carries. They will not know why. They will not be able to explain it. But they will feel what it is to be an orphaned creature, burned and broken, crying in the dark, and what it is to be found." Outside, Admiral Das Varen of the Free Systems Defense Compact was running his 3rd cold simulation of a possible engagement with the 7 consortium vessels in orbit. He had 8 ships to their 7. Not good odds, because consortium ships were newer, better armed, and had full supply chains behind them. He had volunteered to come anyway, because Preva's message had included the full file, and he had read it, and after 40 years in military service, he had finally found something he was willing to lose ships over. He sat in his chair looking at the orbital display and said to no one in particular, "What exactly are we doing here?" His comms officer, young, nervous, Tessari trained on human-operated equipment, said quietly, "I think we are refusing to move, Admiral." Varen considered that. That's not a strategy. No, the officer agreed. But the consortium arrived with 7 ships to recover one small creature from one man who won't leave it. And somehow that seems to be enough to have started a war. A pause. Perhaps refusing to move is exactly the right strategy. In the medical bay, Reth finished eating. She stood up, walked to the center of the room and made a sound. It was not the warship scream. It was not the crying sound from the crate. It was something else, long and low and layered, like 3 sounds existing in the same space at once. The walls did not crack. The sensors did not fail. But every person in the medical bay went very still, and some of them could not afterward explain why their eyes were wet. Preva, standing in the doorway, put her hand on the frame to steady herself. Darren, sitting on his crate, said nothing. He had felt it too, felt it differently than the others, because he was the source of what she was broadcasting, and feeling it reflected back at him from the outside was a strange and very quiet thing. Above them in orbit, the first consortium vessel rotated 15 degrees off its blocking angle, then stopped, then rotated back, then rotated away again. Lethon watched the orbital display and said, almost to himself, "She is beginning." The song had no words. It did not need any. The blockade did not break with a battle. It broke with a resignation letter. On the 9th day, the commander of the consortium blockade fleet, a Vyarth officer named Vorit, who had spent 8 days receiving orders from Ethon, and then receiving different orders from the consortium legal division, who were now receiving subpoenas from 3 separate arbitration bodies simultaneously, sent a single-line communication to Brath's Landing. It read, "Fleet withdrawing pending arbitration review." Then his ships turned around, one by one, and went back the way they came. No shots fired, no ships lost, 7 vessels entering orbit, 7 vessels leaving it. Preva stood at the display and watched them go and said, "That's it." "That's it," Lethon said. "We didn't even negotiate." "You did not need to," Lethon said. "The consortium's legal structure requires member consensus for military action against a protected entity. 3 members withdrew their support last night. You were watching the Sorathi broadcast reach them in real time." He paused. They did not know why they were suddenly unwilling to maintain the blockade. They only knew they were unwilling. Darren heard this from across the room and said nothing. He was sitting on his crate. He was eating. Reth was beside him, also eating, leaning her full weight against his side the way she had started doing recently, which he suspected was less about comfort and more about the fact that she was now large enough to simply make things happen by being heavy. The weeks that followed moved strangely. News moved faster than ships in this part of space, and the news that moved was Preva's file, every document, every record, the full 40-year history of what had been done to the Sorathi and why. Ethon was brought before the Galactic Arbitration Court on Tessari Prime. He arrived wearing the expression of a man who had already written the speech. He gave it calmly and without apology. He had acted to preserve galactic stability. The Sorathi were a destabilizing species. The decision had been difficult but necessary. The court was quiet when he finished. Then the presiding judge, a Vrethian elder with 6 eyes and a career spanning longer than Darren had been alive, said, "We have received testimony from 41 crew members of a consortium pursuit vessel who were incapacitated by a Sorathi hatchling defending her guardian. Not one of them described the experience as an attack." A pause. "They described it as grief, the grief of the creature, the grief of being the last." Another pause. "Whatever you believed you were preventing, Consul Ethon, I do not think you understood what you were destroying." The verdict took 4 days. The sentence was longer. On Brath's Landing, no one told Darren any of this in real time. He learned it the same way he learned most things now, late, second-hand, from Preva, while he was doing something else. She found him outside the medical bay on a cargo crate with Reth sitting beside him in the morning light, both of them watching a group of colony children play some game in the yard that involved a lot of running and no clear rules. Preva sat down and told him about Ethon, about the verdict, about the 3 new diplomatic compacts forming around the Sorathi historical record, about the fact that the Free Systems Defense Compact had been formally recognized as a voting entity in the Galactic Arbitration System, the first time in human history that a human-majority coalition had a legal seat at the galactic table. Darren listened to all of it. He nodded occasionally. He ate his ration pack. When she finished, he offered her the second half. She took it. Lethon arrived an hour later and stood in front of Darren with the careful manner of someone delivering news they have been rehearsing. As Reth's documented guardian bond, Darren now held a legal position that had never existed before, co-custodian of a recognized sentient species under galactic law. It carried responsibilities. It carried protections. It carried, Lethon noted, a seat on the newly formed Sorathi Heritage Committee, which would be making decisions about Sorathi history and rights for the next several decades. There was a long silence. "Can I give that to someone else?" Darren asked. "No," Lethon said. Darren looked at Reth. Reth looked at him. She was stealing the rest of his ration pack. He let her. "Same thing I've been doing," he said finally. "Keep her fed, keep her safe. Try not to break anything important." Lethon was quiet for a moment. The Sorathi, historically, were very effective at breaking things that deserved to be broken. Reth finished the ration pack. She stood up, stretched the full wingspan, bronze and gold in the morning light, her crooked wing finally straightening out properly for the first time, and exhaled a long, slow breath. The smoke curled upward, gold, catching the light. The children in the yard stopped their game and stared. One of them, the girl with the bandaged hand, unbandaged now, pointed up at the smoke trail and said something to the child beside her that Darren could not hear. In the arbitration court record filed under case 7741 Sorathi, in the column asking what entity had initiated the original challenge to the consortium blockade, the clerk had written, "One human, one hatchling, no legal standing, no formal complaint, no declaration." The clerk had added a note below, which was not standard practice and which no one corrected. They simply did not leave. On Brath's Landing in the morning, Darren finished his half of the ration pack. Reth finished hers. The sun came up slow and pale over the gray-green hills. Neither of them moved. Above them the sky was empty. The ships were gone. Below them, the children went back to their game.